So I'd like to welcome Mr Matt Yardley and Mr Pat Kidney, both partners at Analysis Mason, to the meeting to discuss the National Broadband Plan. Before we begin, I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that by virtue of Section 17(2)(l) of the Defamation Act 2009, witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect of their evidence to this committee. However, if you are directed by the Chairman to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter and you continue to do so, you are entitled thereafter only to a qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You are directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings is to be given, and you are asked to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect that, where possible, you should not criticise or make charges against any person, persons or entity by name or in such a way as to make him, her or it identifiable. I also wish to advise you that any submission or opening statements that you make to the committee will be published on the committee website after this meeting, and members are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that they should not comment on, criticise or make charges against a person outside the Houses or an official either by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. I just remind members and witnesses to turn off your mobile phones as they interfere with the sound system. So I'll start by asking Mr Yardley to give your opening statement.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Matt Yardley. I'm a partner and head of Analysis Mason's Manchester office. I'm Analysis Mason's lead partner on the National Broadband Plan here in Ireland. Joining me today is my colleague Pat Kidney. He's also a partner and head of Analysis Mason's Dublin office and our day-to-day partner on the National Broadband Plan. In this opening statement, I'll provide some background on Analysis Mason. I'll then take the committee through the scope of our engagement, followed by commentary and some aspects of our advice. Analysis Mason is a sector specialist in telecoms and works across three main areas: strategy, transaction support and policy and regulation. The company was established over 30 years ago, and we now have 260 staff in 16 offices around the world, with our HQ in London. I've been with Analysis Mason for over 22 years, and I've worked extensively on broadband-related projects for a wide range of clients, including operators, investors, regulators and governments. I have a particular focus on national broadband policy and implementation, and I've been heavily involved in this area in the UK, as well as other international markets. I've also given evidence in competition tribunals and commercial arbitration cases in the UK and in Ireland in relation to high-speed broadband networks. My role on this project for the department is to provide overall project direction and quality assurance to the team of technical experts working on the project. That team has expertise across fibre networks, fixed wireless access networks, network deployment, state aid, IT systems and other technical areas. Analysis Mason was appointed in January 2015 following a competitive tendering process as technical advisors to the department, working closely with the department's CTO, Patrick Neary. Our scope of advice was in two main phases: the planning stage, which is ahead of procurement, and that included technical strategy, network cost modelling, developing the broadband specification, and identifying the premises in the intervention area. In the procurement stage, our work included developing various technical specification documents and technical evaluation criteria, interacting with the bidders during the technical dialogue meetings, undertaking the technical evaluation and providing various technical inputs to the procurement documentation, along with other ad hoc matters. In addition, we've provided various inputs to PwC and Mason Hayes & Curran, for example, on state aid matters and some regulatory issues. Analysis Mason's role in the pre-qualification of bidders was centred on assessing the technical and professional capability of the consortium with regards to the deployment, operations and maintenance of networks of a similar size and scale as that envisaged in the MBP strategy. When a change of consortium member occurred, we were part of the team that confirmed the consortium continued to meet the technical and professional capability criteria in accordance with the published tender documents. We were the lead author of all the technical related procurement documents covering the technical solution, future-proofing, products, deployment, operations and maintenance. We took a lead role in the technical dialogue with the bidders, clarifying bidder responses and evaluating the responses against the procurement criteria. We also provided technical briefing notes and made presentations on technology to various stakeholders, for example, covering technology developments in fibre and wireless networks. As the committee is aware, AIR submitted plans to expand its fibre network build to cover around 300,000 premises in the intervention area. And in accordance with the published criteria, we carried out an assessment of the credibility of these plans from a technical and deployment perspective, and we concluded they were credible. The intervention area was changed as a result. Another area of focus for Analysys Mason was on network costing. This took place early on in our engagement and was updated at various points throughout the process as more information came to light. Our costing work included both capital expenditure, CAPEX, and operating expenditure, OPEX, elements covering both the initial build of the network and the long-term operation of the network. These costs were then taken by KPMG as an input into their subsidy model. We were also involved in technical aspects of the contract development, helping the department manage the various technical risks that have been identified throughout the process. The final tender was received in September 2018. We concluded that the bidder proposed a technical solution that was capable of delivering on the government's requirements. As part of that analysis, we noted that the total cost, that's CAPEX plus OPEX, was broadly similar to our costing model when differences in take-up were accounted for. I'm happy to take questions on the advice that we have provided. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just before I go to my colleagues, and I know you made reference to this in your opening statement, but if you could just expand on this question, and I suppose it's a question that's come up a number of times here and elsewhere about the capacity of the consortium to deliver on this project. And are you confident that the consortium has the capability and the capacity, particularly in light of the changes to the consortium, in order to roll out broadband? And is that based on their previous experience, or can you just elaborate on your confidence around their ability to do that?
So we understand that's a critical area for the department to understand. So I'd break it down into two stages. During the early stage of the procurement, at the PQQ stage, that's really about the consortia demonstrating experience in other projects which are similar. And they did that across a range of areas. So we were interested in experience and deployment of similar networks. So that's the deployment or the build of those networks, operating similar networks to the long-term operation of a live network, their experience of operating wholesale networks, which is clearly particularly relevant in the case of any state aid project, and also some issues to do with quality, health and safety and such like. So at that point we were confident that they met all of the criteria as laid out in the PQQ stage. If we then move forward through the procurement, and particularly to final bid stage, then of course there was a lot more detail that the bidder provided in relation to the network that it had put forward or proposed. And I think just to kind of, in summary, they are building a substantial organisation, so 265 people in the core MBI business, of which many of the senior managers of that entity are now public. The MBI website lists out, I think, 12 people. So what's interesting there is that a lot of those people are, I could use the term industry veterans. They've been working in the telecom sector for a long time, many of them in Ireland, for a whole range of operators as well. So at the senior management level, we were confident that that was shaped in a well-structured manner. And then beneath that, we were looking at how they structured all of the functions within the business. So that's still within MBI. And part of the evaluation criteria looked at that in some detail from an ongoing operations perspective. And then we turned to all of the partners that they were relying on for delivery of the network. And we there have a range of companies which are very well established in Ireland, which work with all of the operators here in Ireland themselves. So these are the main subcontractors for the build and operation of the network. And in that sense, MBI isn't doing anything different to any other operator here in Ireland. So they are subcontracting to a range of very well qualified organisations, and that was demonstrated both at the PQQ stage and throughout to final bid stage. So that whole track of evaluation was very carefully done. They met all of the criteria, so they passed that test. But just more broadly, looking at how the organisation is gearing up, then this looks and feels like a credible wholesale entity. It's at the right scale. It's at a similar scale to those that we see in other markets around Europe. And they are partnering with very well-established and recognised organisations. So yes, we are confident they've put forward a very credible bid.
And are you confident that the cost of the proposed rollout is satisfactory? So
we are, in summary, yes. There's a lot beneath that, as you can imagine, and as I said in my initial statement. Understanding the nature of the costs in this kind of operation is complex. It was probably the first piece of work we did going back to 2015, 2016, where we used an existing cost model, which is incredibly detailed, and we developed that to understand what the possible costs of delivering this network may be. And I can talk the committee through more of that detail if necessary. But as we went through the process, we learned a lot from interacting with, at that point, there were 3 bidders. And then when it went down to 2, we started to improve and refine the assumptions in our cost model. But I would say at this point, the initial cost of deploying the network actually turned out to be very similar to our original estimates. That's the cost to build the network. So we were confident that the cost model we use the term homes passed, so the cost to cover all of the intervention area was very well behaved and actually came in very close to the 2 bidders when they put forward their detailed costed solution. So that gave us some confidence that the model was sound and robust. So that, I'd say in summary, is the key opening comments on the cost. I'm very happy to go through more of the detail behind that if the committee would find that useful.
I might just roll it out to the members and we could come back to costs as well if members want to do that. Deputy Brian Stanley.
I want to welcome our 2 guests from Analysis Mason for attending. Just a few questions. Just to start with the cost one, that obviously you played a crucial role in the procurement process and as the technical advisor for the department. And just could you outline to the committee, because it's one of the major questions around this project, what do you attribute the what are the key factors in terms of the costs escalating from 800 million to 2.95 in terms of the piece that the taxpayer has to come up with? What do you attribute that to? Because in 2015, that was the figure that was being penciled in by the people who were working on the project at the time, and that was the one being put out and about. And it's significant. I mean, in little over 3 years, the fact that we multiply, 250%. If you're building a house, the equivalent would be is that the house now costs 200,000 to build, and in 3 years' time, you're told, oops, it's now costing 650,000. Will I go through each of the questions first, or
do you want to answer that question?
I'd like to answer that now if possible, because there's a few facets to it which I would like to go through in detail, because I think we should just be very clear at the start that the numbers that you quote there, the 800 million and the 2.789 billion, they're the subsidy. Okay, so just to be clear on our role on this project is on the technical side and understanding the cost. So as I said in my opening statement, we're very much focused on CapEx and OpEx. The subsidy is a separate thing. It takes those costs in as an input, but the subsidy is also calculated, taken into account
if you could just clarify, well, we're told in the last week or so that the overall cost is somewhere in the region of 5 billion.
So that's the total cost.
The total cost. In other words, the 2.97 and roughly 2 billion. That's what we're told.
So those numbers are...
Mr. Yard, do you want to explain the cost from your perspective and the subsidy, the difference?
Yeah,
maybe that might clear it up.
The 800 million and their subsidy numbers. Okay. What I can say is there were changes through the project which impacted our estimate of the cost. That then was taken into the subsidy model, which influenced the numbers that you've just quoted there. So, first of all, there are 3 main reasons why, from our perspective, that subsidy number increased, 2 of which are cost-related and hence within our scope of work. So I'd like to talk to those 2. The first one relates to Air's commitment to roll out in the 300,000 homes area. So when we originally built our model, knowing that Air was going to build out there, we'd made an assumption that we would effectively buy a product from Air to get through, to traverse that 300k area. Okay? And that was a reasonable one. That would be the most cost-effective way for any bidder to get through to the other side to serve the remaining households, the 540,000. Now, through the process, and particularly when we got to the final bid stage, it became clear that that product was not fully consistent with what the bidder needed to meet all of its obligations in a 25-year contract. So the bidder had some nervousness about relying on that product to go traverse the 300k because it was signing up to 25 years of obligations for a whole range of things, and everything was dependent on that connection through those 200k. So we took the decision on the cost modelling side to inform the department that actually it would be more prudent to not assume that product was available and to actually build through that area with new fibre using ducts and poles from Air. That's more expensive because we're deploying new infrastructure across that area. Okay? So that's stage 1, and that was the most important cost change.
Could I clarify?
Through the whole process.
My understanding from the answers that we were being given, going back over the last couple of years, and I'm open to correction on this, by the ministers and by department, senior officials in the department, is that obviously Air was in the game, and Cyril was in the game, and ENET, or as it is now, Grannon and McCourt, was in the game. And the other 2 withdrew. And obviously had Air have won the bid, had they won the bid and they stayed in the race, they would have rolled it out using their, side by side with their copper or in place of their copper network, because we were told fibre to every home. That was repeated over and over again by the minister. And the only change that's taken place that I've heard is that the fibre to every home has been dropped in recent months. And my understanding is that from a long ways back, for 2 years now, is that if Air weren't in the game, if it wasn't an Air, if Air weren't successful or didn't stay in the race and weren't successful, that whatever entity won the contract and were involved in rolling it out would rent the poles and ducting off Air. And there has been, there's a figure out there in terms of what that's costing. It's roughly 0.9 of a billion. But you seem to be indicating that what you seem to be talking about, Matt, is in relation to that you costed for a whole new network being built beside, you used the words new poles and cables.
New fibre, I apologize if I said that, I meant new fibre using existing poles and ducts. Right. Yeah. So you're right, there is a time aspect to this. So originally...
But that would indicate that was predicated, that the original cost of 0.8 billion was predicated on Air being the contractor. In other words, that they would be the successful bidder. Because if they weren't a successful bidder, whoever, whether it was Matt Yardley Limited that won the contract, they would have to, you would have to, rent, hire, lease the poles and ducting off Air who owned them and run the cable along that network.
Can I just want to take it back, because you said the original cost of 800 million. That wasn't the original cost. That was the original subsidy. And in actual fact,
subsidy.
But there's quite a distinction, and they seem to be used interchangeably here. The subsidy does not just depend on the network costs and the network capital costs and the operating costs. It would also depend on revenue, take-up, and lots of other things that we wouldn't have actually had sight of. In fact, we didn't know that 800 million cost until... that 800 million subsidy until quite late in the process. Perhaps we can get the exact date, but certainly in September. And so it seems to be used interchangeably. And the second point on this is that because we received detailed network costs and operating costs from two bidders. One was Air, and one was the bidder that is now the preferred bidder, GENC. And the costs, the level of costs on both bidders were quite similar. So I just need to dispel
and if I come back to your question on the timing. So the 800 million was based on a model at the time which, for the 300k where I was rolling out, we were renting a service through that 300k and we were building thereafter. Okay. And for the reasons I given, that was felt later on not to be suitable. So the cost went up because we were then building... I'm just talking about cost at this point. The cost increased because we were deploying new fibre in the 300k area. So that's element one of explaining the cost change. Related to that, because Air was deploying in the 300k area, and because we went through a process of saying, do they come off the map for state aid reasons, and we concluded yes, they did. Now we're having to build out fibre through an area where the bidder can't generate any revenue. So there's a double whammy at that point. We've increased our costs, which are all up front, so the hit is very hard, and we can't get any revenue from the 300k area. Okay. Now that's a very material change for the subsidy. That's element one of the cost change, and I'm explaining how that also relates to subsidy. There then was an additional change on the cost model, which related to a kind of more nuanced point in a way about the assumptions in the original cost model about the mix of underground and overhead infrastructure in the intervention area. Now this one was very difficult to resolve because there's no obligation on Air to publish that information. There is no public source that you can go and look at to say how many poles and how many ducts are there in the 540,000 area in Ireland. There's no source for that at all. So we were working with a working assumption at that time of a certain mix of underground and overhead. As we went through the process and we saw, in fact, the two bids come in, their assumptions were different to the one in our cost model. That was quite important to us because it meant our cost difference, our cost was different to the one that the bidders were putting forward. We spent a lot of time trying to understand why that was the case, and it ultimately led to the department issuing a request to Air to provide its infrastructure database, its infrastructure atlas, which detailed all of the poles and ducts in the intervention area. We analysed that, and then we found out actually the assumptions did need refining, and that had a secondary effect on cost. That wasn't as big as the first one I described, which is the impact of the 300k. But it did have an effect, and it was quite material. But that was, I'd characterise that as we just learned through the process. We got better information as we went through. They are the two things that drove the change in cost. With the revenue change as well, that explains how we went from the 800 million to, I think the right figure to compare is about the 1.8 billion on a like-for-like basis.
Okay. Just two other questions, because I don't want to delay the meeting. So, in any case, the cost is now, we're told, and I've been told in the last couple of weeks, is in the region of 5 billion. And you've confirmed what I've been told I was wrong on for the last 2 years, in relation to 2 years and 3 months now, that the Air 300,000 easiest to reach households, that intervention, that part being hived off has materially affected this process and has had a huge economic impact on it. And thanks for that. And you're aware that obviously what has happened since that the other two operators have pulled out, the other two credible operators, which was Air and ESB Vodafone, called Cyril. And that's what's happened there. So I mean, that has been a huge, and it was obvious that was going to happen at the time, but I was certainly contradicted on that and told I was wrong, wide of the mark. I don't get any pleasure out of saying that, you know, it now seems, and you've clarified that for us here today, and I take on board all of the points you've made in the last 5 or 10 minutes in relation to that. Just one question. In relation to the, could you outline to the committee why air is being given 0.9 of a billion or $1 billion? That changes sometimes for the use of the infrastructure, which is in parts of it is in very, very bad condition and very obvious driving around the country in the form of that. Since air being privatised, there has been little investment in parts of the infrastructure, and literally some of the poles have fallen over, or have, if they have been hit with cars or something like that, or vehicles, some of them you can see them broken and the cables are just holding them up. I don't know what the underground infrastructure is like, but I'm told from people who work in air that there has been nothing done with it since the mid-1990s, late 1990s, from some people who work in the industry, and that it is lying in bad condition. On the other hand, we have the ESB network that is in better condition, has to be in better condition because it's actually carrying live electricity wires, but traditionally has been kept very well and has been well maintained. And it does go to every house, except for a few people maybe who, for whatever reasons, right, might be you count them in one hand in any one of the 26 counties that wouldn't have electricity in the home. I'm only aware of 2 or 3 in the county that I'm living in that don't have electricity. And you know, why is air being handed that amount of money, which is a huge slice of the subsidy? It's 1/3 of the subsidy, of the overall subsidy, at least 1/3, if not more, of that subsidy, almost €1 billion of taxpayers' money, you know, for permission to use this infrastructure that's in bad condition, that, you know, will have a charge on it year on year, right throughout the term of the contract over 25 years, while the ESB network is there and ready to use. And indeed, the ESB are already using that network to carry telecommunications fibre, and it's being used in other countries. That system is being used where you have a dual purpose, electricity and telecommunications on the same infrastructure. Do you think that makes sense, and is it possible to do that?
So I think the kind of fundamental principle on a project of this kind, and it really kind of comes down from European Commission state aid rules, is that a whole set of principles, one of which is reusing infrastructure, minimising duplication of assets, so really kind of be cost efficient, minimise distortion in the market as far as possible. So I wouldn't characterise it as air being handed the money, in that, you know, it is perfectly possible for the bidder to use other infrastructure if they felt that that could meet their purpose. So it could meet the requirements, it could help meet all the SLAs that the bidder was required to meet under the contract. So there is that's down to the bidder to choose. When they put the final bid in, they had to have absolute confidence that that infrastructure could be used for the purpose of deploying fibre. Now, at that time, I don't think they were in a position to say they had that with the ESB, but that could change in the future. It's perfectly possible through this process for them to engage with other providers of infrastructure to deploy if it's more cost effective, or they've got more confidence from the delivery or the timescales or whatever. So there's nothing that at this stage prohibits that from happening. Again, on the comment about aerial versus underground, I mean, duct infrastructure generally isn't maintained that much unless it needs to be, typically in more urban environments, if it's dug up when there's some property development or such like. That's where a duct infrastructure tends to get maintained, but they generally don't get touched unless they need to be. But I do accept the point in Ireland, particularly in the west, where the kind of inclement weather could affect infrastructure. They will need to be upgraded over time by air, and they'll recover the cost of doing that through the charges they make. But if you think about the policy objective here, okay, that's going to air, but MBI is delivering through its retail partners services to end users. So ultimately, the end user will benefit from that. if there are better ways of delivering that in certain areas, then the bidder is more than open to go and look at those options.
So the ESB network could be used?
So I think there are a range of technical and other health and safety related issues that would need to be overcome. But you are right, there are examples in other countries of electricity infrastructure being, the low voltage distribution network being used. That is possible. And of course they're using it here in Ireland themselves in urban areas.
Yeah,
so it's possible.
Can I expand on that? Because there were meetings, particularly when CSIRO were still in the process, there were meetings with ESB networks. And it was with a view to making the ESB infrastructure available, and I attended some of those meetings with the department. And the use of the ESB infrastructure is not as straightforward as has been sort of maybe set out in the media. It is quite a complex. When you start to go into the infrastructure, of course, the first thing is there are significant health and safety issues. There are also issues with the way leaves along the. It does not go along the roads; it goes direct. And then there's technical issues about how you put the fibre on the medium and low voltage networks. Now, there is an engineering solution, of course there is, but that infrastructure and the products that ESB networks were looking at developing were not in a state where a bid could be put in and a bidder could commit to meeting deployment targets and with certainty and with costs that were certain. So the bidder, and you need to ask the bidder why they chose, but why they chose Eircom, but Eircom, or Open Air, were offering a service with a defined product and a defined regulated price. So you need to put in a bid. You've got considerable uncertainty about how you would use DSB infrastructure. You know, the logic suggests, and you have to commit to the bid. So the bidder left with that sort of choice, went with Air, but there's nothing now to preclude the bidder talking to DSB with a view to using their infrastructure in all or part of their network. And there's nothing in the contract that would prevent that. It would have to be done under change control, but the change control mechanism allows for changes of this nature as long as the benefits to the project and to the state are set out and agreed.
And just to clarify one small point, had ESB CSIRO been the successful, set in the race and been the successful bidder, am I correct in saying they would have used their network to roll this out? That was their intention.
I think that's a fair assumption.
Yes. That was their intention.
Just clarify we don't know what they would have used, but I think that's a reasonable assumption.
Thank you very much.
Deputy Timmy Dooley.
Thanks very much for the presentation. That's helpful. You've set out your involvement in the engagement so far. Has your organisation provided any advice or assistance to Granaghan McCourt at any stage? Okay. Is it fair to say that you have advised most telco operators in Europe at some point in the last?
I'd say many, yes.
Yeah.
So telecoms operators, but everybody else as well associated with our sector, so regulators, governments,
so it wouldn't be unusual for you to have an engagement with a company of standing, as it were, in the telco sector. Okay. Just last week, KPMG, in their submission, contended that their original costings were out of sync to the tune of £1 billion, and they seem to segue out of that analysis based on technical information that you have provided. Is it fair to assume that that related to your reappraisal of the job at hand as a result of that parallel overlay of fibre that you've mentioned to Deputy Stanley?
So the billion doesn't. The billion is the change in the subsidy. So only part of that relates to the change in the technical cost.
So had you a role then in terms of the the soft costs, as it were, the subsidy?
We had no role in that.
Okay.
In fact, and I think Pat explained, we had absolutely no visibility of the subsidy at all until very late in the process.
So your advice all along was just specific to the technical solutions, to the actual build cost, as it were, build and maintenance,
and the operating costs as well. So,
and the ongoing maintenance and operation.
Yeah.
Software and so forth, the support, but the telco costs.
Yeah. So in terms of then rates of sign up, what the revenue might be generated, etc., that was all outside your...
Anything on the demand side was out of our agreement.
Okay. So on the billion then, how much of that could be attributed to the technical change, as it were? So that piece that...
So on that point, we have numbers in one of the reports, but you'll see that that's redacted.
Right, that's why I'm asking the question.
I don't want to give figures that are currently in redaction in documentation. I would say there's a material part of that which relates to costs, but the revenue impact was also...
Can I ask you, just in relation to the redaction in your report, if any of that was redacted on your desire or instruction, or is it purely departmental redactions? So, did you seek, in terms of the publication of these reports, I assume you were asked if it was okay to publish these, for these reports to be published? Was there anything?
I think it was a combination of the, in terms of where we're at in the process, then certainly some of the technical costs could impact how the bidder deals with subcontractors, for example. So we were generally being prudent on that. We don't have a contract at this point. Yeah. So that was the kind of overarching, from a kind of technical costing perspective, having some caution on that.
There's significant commercially sensitive information in our reports. Remember, we had sight of 2 bids. We had sight of costs from competing operators. So there's a huge sensitivity around some of the figures. We've obviously used them.
Talk to me about that, Mr. Kidney. Yeah, about the sensitivities of those costs and how they might compromise a process if they were released now.
Well, for example, one of the subcontractors that is being used by the preferred bidder is also being used by other operators in the market. They may have different costs.
And why would that be a concern to you or us? I mean, how they might display their costs elsewhere? I mean, from our point of view, this is a state contract. We're charged with a responsibility to the taxpayer, so it's for us to try to get to the bottom of it. Don't you think, that there's no commercial sensitivity as it relates to this process?
Well, no, it's commercially sensitive in the market. And the market isn't just this process. The market is much wider, and we have commercial companies that have provided the department and, as their advisor, us, with commercially sensitive information. We have to respect the confidentiality of the process.
Okay. That was outlined last week as well in relation to commercial sensitivity, and I think with respect, I think we all do understand the nature of something that is commercially sensitive, just to have that on the record as well. Mr. Yardley.
Just add a point that may help address the question, which is the costs were looked at in incredible detail by ourselves. So if the concern from the committee is that these costs aren't fair costs, then our work has gone to a lot of detail to understand the volumes and the unit prices involved in this bid. Yeah. And that report you have there, and you can read into it, there are certain things which do give a sense of where we landed on this. At an aggregate level, we were happy with the cost. There were certain elements beneath that we had questions about, which need working through with the bidder through the final stages. So the diligence has been done on that, but I think it's fair for us to be cautious on the commercial sensitivity point, and that's a separate one to the understanding whether the state's exposed.
Okay. So then, the increase in the cost related to the decision to roll out a parallel fibre cable along that 300,000 network. Could you give us some sense of what?
I can't, I'm afraid. No.
Okay. Would you accept that? Okay. Can you try then to explain to us the cost differential between the purchase of that product that you talked about, which was obviously some capacity to splice into the existing 300,000 on the periphery of that outer wheel, if you want. what the differential in cost might have been had you proceeded with the purchase of that product. In other words, attaching to an existing web that already existed.
Can't do that, I'm afraid, as well. It's the same question, really, in essence.
Well, then, that's fine, but I still need to probe it through.
Yeah.
Can you explain to us why the decision was taken to overlay in a parallel network along that 300,000? What was the guiding principle behind that?
So we set off with what we thought the most cost-efficient way of doing this was, which was that buying that product through the 300k area. Yeah, in discussions with the bidder, and again it comes back to when they put the final bid in, they are putting in a bid where they have to have absolute confidence that those inputs they're taking from others are suitable for the duration of the contract. And the bidder, and I think we had some understanding of that, was they were concerned about taking that risk, because that product is not being provided over a 25-year base term, and they had no view at that point on how that would be made available across the internet, what the 300k and how it related to the intervention area. The product development of it wasn't specified, as I understand it. The future concerns about pricing, terms and conditions, and a whole range of other things of which we have looked at some detail from a technical perspective. So,
okay, so can I hold you there? Can I just hold you there? Do you not accept then that there's the potential for that contract to now breach state aid rules on the basis that you're now rolling fibre past the homes of 300,000 that already have a service? What's to stop Granahan McCourt in the not too distant future offering a service, a connection service, to those 300,000 in competition with the commercial provider that's there? If that were to happen, in my view, it would have had the use of state aid rules. It would be using state aid to provide a benefit to Granahan McCourt to compete in an area that's not within the intervention area.
So, I'll give a comment. We're not the state aid advisor on the project, but I have a kind of from general experience of working on state aid projects in other places. That area is not in the intervention area.
Correct. So,
the bidder is not allowed to use public funds to serve the market in that area. It can't use anything that
How could you prevent it? How could it be prevented? If there's a fibre optic cable passing the door of somebody within the 300,000 area that's paid for by the taxpayer, what prevents the National Broadband company?
I could give an answer which, in principle, how I would suspect it may work. I don't know for sure, because I don't know this part of the contract. As I say, it's under the kind of state aid provisions.
But it would be the contract.
But it also goes then for the contract period is, and this is we had a discussion here last week, and this is why it's useful to have yourselves from the technical point of view. But we had a discussion here last week about what the net value of the company might be at the end. Well, now to me, the value of the company at the end has increased dramatically by the information that you have provided us with, which is that this is not fibre optic connected to the outer extremities of an existing network. It's actually the building of an entirely new network across 840,000, servicing 840, probably more, because my understanding is...
I don't think that's correct. I don't think that's the characterisation. The project is serving the homes in the 540,000 area.
But the network
we just have to get there because of Air's decision to invest there.
Correct. Yeah. But in doing
so... That's very clearly demarcated.
No, I accept that. Yeah. But in doing so, you build a network that's now passing perhaps another 400,000, because Air has indicated in their rolling out of the 300 that they've passed about another 30 to 40,000. So it's fair to assume that to get to that 540,000 premises, you have to pass another 400,000 premises, somewhere between 300,000 and 400,000 premises, paid for by the taxpayer, which we accept is necessary to do so. But that does create a long-term value in the company, in my view, that wouldn't have been characterised heretofore.
Well, I think all we could say was that effectively the state aid provisions in the contract would need checking to see how it deals with that. My expectation is that that's very, very tightly managed.
Okay.
Within the contract.
Okay, well, we can follow that up with somebody else. So then just moving along to Granahan McCourt, the remaining bidder, the preferred bidder, and you talked about, I think earlier on, the role that you played in, I think, in response to the chairperson's question, which was the technical capability, suitability of the company, and that it had met all the milestones that were set out. We're almost been given those as that they were handed down on a tablet of stone from somewhere. But like when you compare Granahan McCourt versus the other two main bidders, there certainly doesn't seem to be the same level of expertise, the same level of experience, the same level of project management, the same deployment of broadband services. So can you tell us, was it a desktop study done, or did you look at some networks that were built by all concerned? So how did these companies pass the technical suitability test?
So they had to put forward examples of their experience, as I said earlier on, across a range of criteria. So building, operating, wholesale specific, and then other kind of environmental and other quality matters. So they demonstrated that across the consortium. So I think it is important to stress that there is the MBI organisation, and a lot of the build and operational expertise sits with its partners. And just the information in the public domain on the MBI website, if we just look at the senior management team, the expertise, I'll just read out the companies where they've got expertise from. So Siemens, Ena, Airspeed, Level 3, Aircom, Magnet, Aurora, Rogers, a cable company in Canada, Magnet, Aircom, Hibernia. So the senior management team are all industry veterans, many of which have worked in Ireland. So if you're building a new organisation, I would say that's a good starting point. I think we all accept that it's really important for that entity to engage with its partners, the consortium members, and with very robust subcontracts which meet the requirements of the state. And I think that's where we're at in the process.
Yeah, but just to be clear, Mr. Yardley, there is no consortium here. There is a list of there's a list of subcontractors who are identified as partners. I mean, it's language that has been very loosely used throughout this process. There was a consortium at the beginning that included John Lang, it included SSE, and included ENET. But over the course of the period of discussion or dialogue, the character and nature of that consortium changed to the extent at the end, really the only party was a finance house out of Boston, namely Granahan McCourt. There was a recognition that there were subcontractors, but not against which their reputation could be held to account. They were just subcontractors. So they're not part of the consortium. They're not asserting anything other than...
I'll just give a first comment, and maybe Pat will just add a little bit more. But that structure is the same way in which a lot of the other companies you've cited operate with these organisations. So MBI is not doing anything different in terms of its contracting arrangements compared with other large, well-established operators in Ireland. And that's a model that we see everywhere. Telecoms operators generally outsource a lot of these functions to companies similar to this.
But the parent company in those cases usually are telecom companies, the parent.
Yeah, so we fully accept they are building a new telecoms organisation.
Granahan McCourt isn't a telecoms organisation.
No, but MBI is a new organisation being staffed with people who have vast experience of the Irish telecoms market. So there is, we accept this isn't a large, well-established company that's been operating telecoms for 20 years in Ireland. But what they have put forward through the whole process, both the PQQ stage and the final tender stage, against the criteria, which is the only reference point we have through public procurement, they've met those requirements.
Just finally then, just to move into an area that would be helpful to us in terms of trying to understand costs and that. In terms of your technical solution, did you look at all at a balance between fibre and fixed wireless? Obviously concern for us is not just cost, and that's important, But we're also looking at the rate of deployment, the speed at which people can access high-speed broadband. So just to try to see if you gave any consideration to a mix of fibre with good quality fixed wireless.
Okay, I'll give it again. Excuse me. An opening comment. So it's a question we get asked in other jurisdictions a lot. It's a very, very important one, certainly in a project of this kind. So just in terms of just from the outset, I would say you termed it our solution. It's not our solution. We've gone out to the market with a specification which the market has told us what the solution is. So at the point that we had 3 bidders, they were all coming forward with a fibre solution. They are the best entities to optimise the technical solution. We just evaluate that. Does it meet the criteria and such like? So that's the overarching point. We're not buying a technology here. Government isn't buying a technology. We can't do that under state aid rules. So we take a party through that proposes the best solution to meet the requirement. But we did look at fixed wireless early on in the process, as I described when we first started here. At the point before we'd engaged any bidders, we were doing costing work, looking at. We had no idea what the solution would be at that point, and we did a range of modelling exercises looking at fibre only, mixes of fibre and fixed wireless, different qualities of service on fixed wireless, in fact, as well. So not just we're interested in how the costs behave with relaxing quality. And we concluded through that exercise over the 25-year period that wireless would generally cost similar or in fact more than fibre would. Now, that may seem a slightly unusual finding, and in many markets we might not find that result. The reason why that happens here in Ireland is because of the distribution of rural population, which is very, very sparse. Compared to my home country in England, where in very rural parts of the country we have small clusters of villages or hamlets, we don't see that as prevalent in Ireland. In fact, the ribbon development situation here is a real challenge for any technology, fixed or fixed wireless, in fact. So that was a conclusion we came to based on cost, and you're right, but we did look at different levels of quality as well. A third point of evidence on this, which I think is useful, and I think Comreg explained last week, that they put out a report by Oxera and Real Wireless which looked at high-speed mobile. So if you were to cover Ireland with high-speed mobile coverage at the same specification that we have here, or broadly similar, then that would cost something like 1.9 billion euros and require around 6,000 new sites. And it might take 10 years to deploy. So that was completely independent of our work. And actually, I should stress that was mobile, but Comreg also looked at fixed wireless. Now, they didn't put costs out in this case. This is a piece of work, I think, done by Plum. But they also indicated it may require something like 4,000 to 5,000 new sites. So, yeah.
There's been a lot of talk about the number of sites. That's if you were to do the entirety of the intervention area. But I'm talking about that sweet spot that exists somewhere between, 60, 70% fixed, or 60 to 70% of fibre, 30%, or somewhere around 30% of fixed wireless, in an effort to get really the rate of deployment. And if it's not going to cost more, I mean, I know you can talk about resilience over 25 years, but who knows what the wireless technology, fixed wireless technology will be like in 25 years' time, or 20 years, or 10 years even. But the difficulty that we're trying to address, I suppose, is the needs of consumers who are being told you're on the 5 to 7 to 10 year rollout. That really is difficult because, quite frankly, a life cycle has gone by for them in that period of time. So to see if there's really, to try to understand from yourself, if there's a way to do this that would give a quicker deployment.
Again, opening comments, and maybe Pat will come in a bit more on that. But so we did look at the mixes, and we were really concerned with, I guess, cost first and foremost, because we're at that stage where we're looking at the kind of potential budget impact. But I think I'd come back to this point that it is, it's an extended period of time, and I can understand the kind of frustration from getting services out there. But it's no guarantee that moving to a kind of mobile or fixed wireless infrastructure would occur any faster. In fact, the Comreg figure, the reason I kind of quoted that was their view to build those many sites may take 10 years. Yeah, that seems a very long period of time, much longer than what we actually have from the bidder. The reason I think it could be so long, because in that environment where you need new towers, new sites, a lot of that would be on private land. Now, if you compare it to what we're doing with this fibre net, we are building infrastructure down the roads on poles and through ducts which already exist. We don't have to build anything new apart from just deploy new fibre. Very, very different to deploying a new mobile or fixed wireless site where you've got to acquire the site, you've got to connect it to power, you've got to connect it to backhaul, you've got to deal with private landowners, you've got to negotiate wayleaves, you've got to get planning permission. Those things tend to site deploy. And if you talk to any mobile operator how complex this can be, then there's no assurance whatsoever, as far as we're concerned, that moving to that kind of mode of deployment would buy you any time. And again, I would just come back to the bidders put forward the best solution for the project. We didn't dictate.
I need to emphasise the extent of the settlement pattern and how that influences these partial models. We have a pretty, you know, the figures for Ireland in rural Ireland are pretty low in terms of inhabitants per square kilometre. I think it's 27, but really that doesn't bring the whole story. It's not a ubiquitous coverage and density. It's road frontage and along our rural roads, and we were quite amazed when we did the analysis as part of a wider team on this. And we found that it's amazingly consistent all over Ireland, that our roads, we have built along the roads, and if you take them in, say, a couple of kilometre stretches, because houses tend to, you know, you get 4 or 5, and then you get a gap in another 4 and 5. We have a linear distribution of houses in our premises, in our rural and very rural areas. So it doesn't lend itself to a high site covering multiple, you know, you could end up building a high site that will cover tens of homes, rented at whatever it is rented. And then you may still miss some of those due to the topography and due to the foliage and so forth. And you would then end up building to those. And we've done considerable work on this. We did work across the entire intervention area where we went to every village and small cluster and said, right, if we went a kilometre and a half from that point, and that just covered 16% of the premises in the entire intervention area. That's 1/6. And then we also said, well, okay, maybe let's have a look at, and we took a number of case studies. We took 4 case studies where we went in and we looked at detailed design of what would happen if we could get in with broadband, we could build out. And you end up then with orphan premises, and significant numbers of them, as I said, 16%, that just fall out of that. So it's a considerable challenge to deploy wireless in an overlay sense throughout this. So when you start, you know, when you think of sort of 20% wireless, that is not 20% that is a contiguous area at the edge of something. That's a 20% that's spread all over the shop, and it is quite a challenge to get to that in that way. And that wasn't just confirmed. This was the work we did first. And then when the bidder solutions came in and they started looking at wireless, and at one stage we have, well, actually 2 of the bidders have wireless entities in related entities. And they looked at it and they came back with a fully 100% fibre solution. So it isn't something that we sort of pulled out of the air. There was considerable analysis done on this, and it comes down to road frontage, and our settlement pattern in rural Ireland is along roads, and it's consistent across the country.
Thank you.
It's very interesting, Mr. Kidney, Mr. Yardley. Can I just ask you to follow up on that? I presume our ESB network, while the poles tend to go across fields into the house, as you say, but it must be configured around our roads-based development, as we haven't you wouldn't have the same problem with the ESB poles that you would have in fixed wireless in those circumstances. It would be contiguous with the road by and large. Is that a fair assessment? If you were to use the ESB poles rather than the air poles?
But it still has to reach the same homes.
Of course, it has to reach the homes, but it doesn't have to. In terms of our ribbon-based development, God knows we all know about it, given out about it for 50 years, the ESB must be already configured for that roads-based development.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be a disadvantage in terms of using the ESB poles.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's fair. The ESB network, the low voltage the low voltage ESB network delivers.
It's used to dealing with that.
Home, right? So it's configured to connect to every home.
Can I ask you a question, Mr. Ardley or Mr. Kenny? Can you just picture the network to me in terms of very basic, simple terms now? In terms of that last mile, or in this case, I suppose, because it's rural, it's last many miles. Where does it become backhaul? Where does the backhaul go to? Where does that backhaul point start on this network?
I think if you think of a tree, and you know, this particular technology is GPON, and you have you basically have it emanating from a point of presence or an exchange, goes out along various roads and then branches off. Right?
So does the backhaul start at the exchange then? Does it?
It does. Well, it starts at the exchange or your point of well, we're talking about the access network, right? Just to clarify.
Well, this is all wholesale access network, isn't it?
Yeah, but okay, we divide networks generally. If we want to build a network that's going to cover homes around a particular exchange, you start at the exchange. So we start at the exchange. We build out along a road, probably starting underground and then going on to a row of poles along that road at the edge of the town and out, and we say out into the countryside. As you hit other roads, you split, and then that's what I mean if you visualize it as a tree. Now the backhaul fibre, which is the fibre that is taking, it's in the same cable as the cable that would be used to drop connections. So they drop connections to the home. So you would end up with, let's say, 36 fibres inside, and it doesn't matter, but for illustration, and 12 might be going all the way back connected to the exchange, and the other 12 will be continuously reused to bring the connections to drop splitters, and those splitters would then drop down onto your.
Okay, so you'd include those.
It would be better with a diagram.
You'd include those. You include some of those splitter connections as part of the backhaul, then, do you? Or?
I suppose
it is through the splitter. It is classification. Like the cable. Looking at the cable, you could not tell if it was backhaul or if it was access, and in fact, in most cases, it would be mixed. Now, going maybe the cable that's going through the 300k would just be backhaul, but in most cases it will be mixed. So you'd use the same fibre. You'd drop a fibre into one part of the splitter, and then you'd connect perhaps 4 fibres from the same cable to the other side. So you split 1 to 4, and then you'd move on, and then you'd have another splitter which would drop onto the connections. It really does need a diagram.
Where does the exchange then? What is the exchange a link point in that? Or
it can be right. That cable will go back and into the exchange. It will be terminated on an optical distribution frame. If that exchange, you could have that, so that exchange is, let's call it, it's an aggregate point. It collects a number, maybe there are four roads going out of the town, there's 4 cables come in. So you could have that point could be a point of interconnect for retail providers, or the aggregated traffic could be brought to a bigger exchange.
Okay.
It would depend on the geography.
Okay. And then the traffic from that exchange, where does it, the backhaul from that, where is that going to?
The products that are available on this network are wholesale products that take from a point of presence to a premise. So the retail service providers, they have options as to which point of presence they go to, but they provide the connection to the internet. So you could have one national, if it was a retail service provider, they could have one national interconnect point with the entire network. In which case, in your question, then the traffic from that exchange would all be brought back to that network.
And would they have their own connection point from that exchange to their
peering point at the internet?
Yeah.
Some may do. So the reason maybe we're struggling with this is that different operators have different network configurations. So depending on what network assets they have, they might be quite happy picking it up in Exchange A, whereas another one doesn't have anything there and they may want to pick it up in Exchange B. So the network solution has to connect to those various points to serve its retail service provider. And it's in its interest to do that because that's where its customers will pick up traffic.
Can you bring this around to, sorry, Carol, just to tease out, because it is complex and it's good to try and understand it. Think of a county, Mr. Keaton. I don't know where you sound like a dog, but...
I'm from Cork.
Excuse, okay. Now, let's pick... You picked my favourite county, my mother and father from Cork. Where in Cork are you from?
Cove.
Cove, okay. Well, Cove wouldn't be in the rural broadband area, would it?
No, it wouldn't, no.
Okay, let's go out from Cove to somewhere else in East Cork, Youghal, whatever, beyond it.
Kilworth, maybe.
Glanthorne.
Glanthorne, yeah.
Is Glanthorne in there? Probably would be.
I don't know offhand, actually. I don't think it is, but anyway.
Where would the exchange be for that type of area? Where's the typical... What sort of town are you talking about? Or is it a village, or is it bigger than that?
Well, actually, we'll take... There is a village quite close to Cove called Ballymore. So the exchange for that is in Cove.
Okay, so Cove.
So perhaps Cove is the exchange, and so you may out in Ballymore put an aggregation point of some sort and serve the surrounding area from that with this tree, and then bring a single cable. Or perhaps if there were a lot, normally if that aggregation point had a lot of customers on it, you'd bring two in a ring into Cove.
The reason I'm asking all this is because, to go back to what you said earlier on in response to Deputy Stanley about one of the increases in costs is because you in effect had to jump over the 300,000 area. In a sense, it surprises me that is such a difficulty, or because, as I've just said, all those exchanges are already on the other side of that 300,000 boundary area anyway.
In general, they're not.
That's the issue.
That 300,000 area is so big then, that covers...
Well, they will tend to be clustered around exchanges relatively close.
Weren't they very clever?
It's basically, I described it just...
I was talking to loads...
Finish on it, yeah.
Yeah, basically the 300k is the 300k near the exchanges.
They got us rightly. I've been talking to people in the business. I've been talking to people in the business who've just signed 25-year backhaul contracts with Air over. You know, it's not unusual to do a 25-year deal. And this, if you bring in, let's say, fibre optic cable into the country, you'll have to do a 25-year. Let's say to serve a data centre. Standard business practice in this country to do a 25-year deal with Air. That's not unusual.
If you have the product, if the product is available, you could do that.
But people are doing it.
Very few people in very specific circumstances.
They have done it, though.
Data centres have done it.
Yeah. So we put a massive price increase. Why was it? Was it because we thought, or the bidder think that Air wouldn't have the capacity on its backhaul network, or?
As I said earlier, I think there's a whole range of reasons why they were concerned about committing to that in the bid. It is. Again, I don't think there's any reason why that couldn't be reconsidered. But from all I was describing was from our internal costing work, that was the reason why the cost went up. If there's any potential to reduce cost, then of course everybody's incentivised to try and do that.
One part of the scheme you'd hope is that it really takes off, please God, and you'd have massive increase of Internet of Things, and every dairy farmer would be sending his milk figures in on the internet, and all sort of everyone, school homework being done, everything. You'd want to check that there's a 25-year capability of the network to cope with the increase in network that in volume of data that we might want. Was there a concern in that regard, or does the contract guarantee that sort of backhaul capability within the contract provisions?
The contract guarantee, first of all, I guess there's quite a bit of capacity on cable, and it really depends. The speed that you get to a fibre optic pair depends on the equipment you have in the end of it. So the network that has been designed here can provide 10 gig services.
But more so now when they've had to create their own, effectively, backhaul.
Yeah, I think, and perhaps to explain this, it would probably be best for us to do a paper on the different components.
I don't know if it's helpful to the Deputy.
If you could, sorry for taking so long, but if you could provide that, I'd really appreciate it. Just a couple of other questions, if I can. What's the use of the metropolitan area networks in this tree?
To get from the edge of the town into the point of presence.
Is there 200 metropolitan area networks? Can't remember the number in the end. 88, sorry. Yeah. Are they all being used?
I think 80 of them. We can confirm the exact number. I just don't have it on the top of the head. But yes, the preference was to use a metropolitan area network and to use the POP that's on the point of presence that's part of that.
Just a second question. You said the reason for those cost increases, because when you looked at the atlas of the ducting and overhead, that it wasn't as it led to a cost increase. I presume that showed less ducting and more overhead. Was that the reason?
The implication was that we had I think too much aerial, so we changed it so we had to deploy more underground, and that was more costly.
Because of the quality of the aerial connection? Or?
No, just by fact, and that what was present there, the assumption on the mix of whether it was duct or aerial was incorrect for the intervention area.
So you had to increase the amount of aerial.
So we changed the amount of underground to aerial, and that led to an increased cost because the underground was more expensive. They
didn't have as much ducting and ground as you expected.
There was more duct actually being used than we thought.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So there was more. It was more expensive to deploy.
Ducting is more expensive?
Yeah.
Okay. Can I ask a question? Just that third reason you said for the reason the subsidy went up wasn't related to the physical construction cost of the network, but what was it related to? You said there were three reasons. One was having to build through the 300,000 area. Yeah. The second was the increase.
The third reason was now the 300k was outside of the intervention area. The project can't generate revenue from that.
Okay.
So as I say, we didn't inspect the revenue side at all, but just to help you understand that why the subsidy can move around quite a lot, it's a combination of that cost change, which happens up front and hits you quite hard, but also revenue over time building up is much less. So when you look at that on a cash flow basis, that has a very strong effect on subsidy. Yeah. But we never saw the effect in totality. All we saw was the cost changes as we changed our cost.
Can I ask a question? Again, I'm talking to industry people who have similar experience in other jurisdictions and so on. They say to me, it's unusual in this case, what we have is we're subsidising the construction cost. In fact, we're paying for it. And we're subsidising the revenue risk. We're covering both in our subsidy. What I hear other international people say would be very standard. It would be normal enough to the state to give a backstop on the revenue side. We don't know what the take is going to be, and so you cover that risk to get the project built. That gives any financial operator, any operator, developer, bidder, feels certainty. They've got a backstop on the revenue. What the construction side costs, why is that subsidised? Ordinarily in the business in this industry, you'd go as a developer and you go to the financer and say, listen, I've got a backstop guarantee on the revenue side. Here's my construction portfolio. If it goes up, I need to get a bigger loan. But why are we subsidising the construction side as well as guaranteeing the revenue side?
I don't think we're not guaranteeing the revenue. So the market risk of with all these projects, I think you're right. The characterisation is the market risk sits with the bidder,
and that's the case here.
And that's true in this case.
But why is the construction risk residing with the government? Why is the cost side? Okay, sorry, you're saying some. It would be more typical in this project for the state to cover the revenue risk and let the developer cover the construction cost and take some of the risk. The developer's taking no risk here. They're covered on the construction side and on the revenue side.
The MBI have the revenue risk in its entirety. There is if they don't make their projected revenues.
But you've just said the reason that the subsidy went up was because the revenue fell. And we increased the subsidy.
Prospective 300,000 customers disappeared from the network, and you still had to build through that area. So you got a double whammy. You have to build at least part of the network, not the actual drop connections. But you build part of the network through the 300k, and you have no revenue from those 300k. And it's even, to add to the vicious circle, they're the 300k that would be served first because they're the closest to the exchange. So they would, and there's nothing to stop once premises are passed. There's nothing to stop them being connected and start revenue generating even before the deployment area is complete.
I should just add as well. So again, the reason I introduced the subsidy discussion because I had a concern that people were mixing cost and subsidy. We don't have any kind of visibility of how that subsidy model works, or in fact any of the revenue side of this equation at all. I was just bringing that to the table to explain there's a third component which will affect.
No, it's useful, and this is complex. We're going to have to dig and get to the bottom of it as best we can. Best we can with blacked out documents. But just to go back to that, what you said is that the cost increases were material to the subsidy increase, but that they were only a small fraction or a portion of it. The others
they were material.
The others wasn't just the loss of the 300,000. There were other subsidy considerations, other subsidy factors in the revenue side, as well as that loss of the 300,000. So we need to find out what they are.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much indeed, Chair.
Do you want to come in briefly?
Just one question. Just in relation to the 300,000 households, premises area, and we've seen the maps where, and you could see that quickly on the day of the press conference that was announced. There was a map handed out, and it's very clear to me what was going to happen because I could identify the areas in the constituency that I know best, where there were clusters of houses and where there was, for a rural area, quite a high density of households, whereas the further to reach ones that were further on out the road or up the Boreens or up the side of the mountain were more scattered. And I think Pat has referred to those, the difficulties in reaching those. But just in relation to having to roll out a parallel fibre cable on those poles or through that ducting in that area that AIR now has, which is covering around 340,000, it's gone up to around 240,000 households. From what you said, the original intention was that you would splice into that, or that you would use the network that was there already, the telecommunications network, that fibre that AIR or whoever would have on that. And AIR then, just for absolute clarity, AIR then got that area, took it over here, and then you had the 540,000 here, or 500,000 as it is now. It's reducing. I think it's down to about 480. And you have the 250,000 here. And from the answers that you gave me, Matt, what you seem to indicate is that the reason that whoever gets this out here has to run a parallel system in tandem or overlaid with the fibre that's here already is that AIR has said, we have this area now. If you want to pass here, you have to put your own system and your own fibre cables on this alongside ours, but you're not going to use ours. That's one point I want to clarify.
If I can correct on that, so that's
the
not
second
correct.
point is
Can I just let him in the first point? Just
That's not right. So Air did make an offer of a product to traverse the 300k.
right.
But the bidder chose not to take that up in the end because of all the issues that I alluded to. So we
Was one of
adjusted
them
the
the price
cost
being
model.
too high?
Pardon?
Was one of them being the price too high?
I don't think no. So the price actually in the cost model meant the total cost was lower. So from the kind of state's perspective, that was better at that point. But there were other reasons, a whole range of other technical reasons, which this is maybe we could provide further information on.
Right.
Could you do that?
That
Yeah.
the bidder was concerned with, and we had some sympathy why they were concerned about it.
send us a list of those.
Yeah.
That would be very helpful. Sorry, your
and
second
just a
point.
very small point of clarification. And obviously for the benefit of using those poles and ducts, they would pay a subsidy for that area, for permission to pass that area. Because obviously Air owns the poles, you know, the consortium, the other consortium, if successful, will want to hang their cables on those and run their cables through the duct and underground. So they would pay Air for that lease.
That's correct.
It's the rental.
That's
lease.
correct, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
And this is difficult because we're only learning, it's complex enough. If there's 80 MANS exchanges with you, MANS is equivalent to an exchange, isn't it? You kind of in the sense.
There is a point of presence,
Yeah.
which will be an aggregate point. So yeah,
How many other exchanges will we be using in the National Broadband Scheme as points of presence?
I can come back with the number.
Roughly.
The total number is around 200, but I just don't have it.
Okay, so MANS will be about a third, or roughly whatever. And are those all the other exchanges? Are they all Air exchanges?
They are.
Okay. And did we not consider, or are we not using, for example, the ESB as a backhaul in a ring of 8, I think, isn't it? Fibre optic cable backhaul, or indeed BT, I don't know if they're still along the rail lines, or indeed there's other state ducting, the Board Gash.
Most of those, the MANs actually, most of the POPs on the MANs are connected to the BT
ESB.
network.
Okay, BT.
And any ones that are close to the ESB, Cork City, for example, I know is.
But all the Air exchanges would use only exclusive the Air backhaul network, typically, wouldn't they?
I don't know the answer to that. They certainly do use Air, but whether they use somebody else or whether somebody else is interconnected to them or not, I don't know, Deputy. But what I should say is that the bidder would build from their. I mean, they would build from the Air exchanges into the points of presence on the map.
And just when you say that it's decided to kind of provide its own network effectively in this 300,000 area, where exactly does that go to then? Where does that go to? Where's the point of presence for those additional fibres that they're putting in?
Maybe again, there may be a slight misunderstanding. So it's probably not to have in mind that they're not passing all 300,000 homes. They're not building a duplicate network passing every single. They're traversing this area to get to the area beyond it. So it's a much more discrete.
To get to where?
To the 540,000 that sit beyond.
Yes, but sorry, as they're jumping over this 300,000 area, where are they jumping from, or what's the other side of that?
In the case of the POPs, on the MANs, if it's a MAN town, they're jumping from the actual point of presence on the MAN, the one that was built when the MAN was built. Yeah. And in the case of a non-MAN town, they're going to the Aircom exchange, or the Air exchange.
So
I think it's quite important to understand that this is a kind of traverse through rather than build past every single home in the 300k area by the bidder. Yeah, that's not what's happening.
But they're traversing through to an exchange on the urban side of Ireland, as it were, or is it there? When you say they're traversing through, and what's?
Yeah, there's a node or a point of presence or some kind of aggregation point where lots of lines come into. And
they could be providing a fibre, let's say from Glanthorne, if just take that as hypothetical, to jump right over back up to Dublin effectively, or would it be?
No, they're not. It wouldn't be that extensive. No. I think if you think of it as you have a central point, be it an exchange or a pop. Around that, normally you have a town or a village, and on the outside of that donut, you have the Air 300k, or part of it. Remember, it's not ubiquitous.
So it's
and
getting you
outside
into
that, you have the area that's served by that exchange.
But
so the inner third is built.
Yeah. But you said earlier on that most of the exchanges were part of that 300,000 area.
No, the 300,000 area would surround them.
Okay.
The 300,000 area is outside the town that the exchange is in it.
Okay.
And that's obvious if you look at the map with the light blue, because they've actually marked it on it.
Thank you, Chair.
Would be traversing that 300,000 air group to get to the 550. So your point about not duplicating completely in the 300,000 area is your point.
Yeah, and I think there may have been.
Yeah.
I was just conscious that maybe one of the deputies kind of misunderstood that. We should be very clear. We're not, about the value question. We're not passing all of the homes. That's absolutely not what's happening.
But it would still be using the ducting and the poles in that traverse.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Some of them.
So, yeah.
Part of it.
Yeah,
A lot.
exactly. Yeah, we're not using every single pulse past every single home. That's right.
I suppose if you're thinking the road out, the main road out of a particular town, it would go out along that, and then when it got to the edge of the 300k, it would start to go left, right, and span out.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time here this afternoon, Mr. Yardley and Mr. Kidney. And the Joint Committee now stands adjourned until 2 p.m. on the 13th of June. Thank you.